We talked about some of the posturing on Jadine's side. Does have a Felidar Cub in the main. Has a Kolagon Storm's Fury in the main today. Both players start out trading lands. Brad on the play on 6, so he'll be down 2 cards. Starts off just on a 2/1 Den Protector.
One made that copy of Dragon Master Outcast for Klomparens, and that's a huge swing card in this matchup if the game goes on for a long time. Nelson with not a lot of clean answers to that card outside of Dromoka's command. 4 made copies of Silk Wrap, although all the thing needs to really do to be productive is to trigger once, and that can happen at the end of the turn via Ojutai's command.
Yeah, these games go late, and Dragon Master Outcast, it is so punishing when it's not removed, more so than a lot of the other creatures Jadine could have. So turn 2, she has another fetch hand. We'll see the response to Den Protector. Looks like it's going to be Jace Vryn's Prodigy. So we go back over to Brad's side. See a lot of decks right now just starting out on turn 2 Jaces. And for Brad, it's another Den Protector and no 3rd land. So Den Protector is normally bent toward the late game. This is a different route to be taking with them.
And not the one you want to take.
She'll go for Mantis Rider. That's an attack. Puts Brad down to 17 and passes. Not only is it a quick clock for her, but it's also a great blocker for Den Protectors.
This is a worst case scenario for Brad now as he's losing both the short game and the long game.
Yeah, he had to just pass that turn. No attacks and ships back. Jace loots on end step. Jadine now filling up the graveyard. She's at 3 cards already. Bloodstained Mire can make it 4 and even 5 as early as this turn if she wanted. And here's a swing from Mantis Rider again. Brad down to 14. She'll pass the turn. Crackling Doom mana up. She has a loot and a Bloodstained Mire available. Brad goes for Death Mist Raptor. He has the engine going, Den Protectors and Death Mist Raptors, but not in the way you'd want to be playing them.
It's an engine of sorts. They are cards he has casted.
Not normally how we see them working together.
Not an engine here.
See whether or not she may be going towards something like Ojutai's command. And it looks like it counter draw with Ojutai's command keeps the Death Mist at bay. Brad passes the turn back. And for Jadine, now here's a loot with Jace. That's going to be flipping him. Mantis Rider will get to continue to swing in. You're right, Brad seems like he's behind early and behind late. So now she has the Planeswalker in play. Shrinks down a Den Protector, swings in with Mantis Rider. That'll put Brad down to 11. So Jadine goes for land 5 and simply passes the turn. Keeping up plenty of kill spells on Brad's side. Here's a removal spell for Mantis Rider. It's Silk Wrap. Does it resolve? Jadine with a main deck negate, and that will be game 1 for Jadine Klomparens.
That one was on the house.
Yeah.
As we say. Brad there mulliganed, got no synergies going, missed some land drops, couldn't kill a Mantis Rider. That one's free.
Yeah, so a little bit of a walkover for Jadine. She wins that one in short order. That's actually, we've seen a lot of these Jeskai Black decks struggle with clock management. So at least from that position, that is very good that they get one, that she gets one in the books with 10 minutes.
Especially since the post-board games here typically slow down by quite a bit.
All right, well, let's look, thinking of post-board games, let's go ahead and look at the sideboard. We look over on Brad Nelson's side. Obviously, that game 1 did not play out the way he would intend it to, but looking at some of those slower post-board strategies that he has available to him, let's walk through how they work.
Well, he's got Irrational Cleric, Knight of the White Orchid, Surge of Righteousness, Stasis Snare, Master of the Unseen, Valorous Stance, Disdainful Stroke, and Negate. You can bring in some of the counter spells. I think the Negate certainly works. There's a lot of spells in Jeskai Black. Disdainful Stroke's a little bit sketchier as the deck plays a lot of cheap stuff, but the more expensive cards of the deck are the more critical ones, so Disdainful Stroke is reasonable to bring in. You can also go to the Master of the Unseen. Jeskai Black doesn't remove permanents from the table that easily, and if the game's going to go on for a long time, it can be very good.
All right, on Jadine's side, she has 2 copies of Exert Influence, an extra Dragon Master Outcast, an extra Felidar Cub. 2 Virulent Plague, 3 Duress, 2 Disdainful Stroke, a Dispel, a Treasure Cruise, and 2 copies of Radiant Flames.
So I love Exert Influence in this matchup. Nelson has a lot of slow threats that end up at about 3 or 4 power, which is exactly the sweet spot for Exert Influence. The Dragon Master Outcast is well suited for this matchup as well, and maybe a little bit of the counterspell action, but probably pretty light on that.
How about a card like Radiant Flames? Brad does commit to the board pretty hard, but at the same time, he has a great graveyard engine.
I think it's an okay card in the matchup, and if Jadine wants it, I would also pair it with a Treasure Cruise to play a little bit of a longer game. I could take it or leave it, but with Jadine on the draw, it definitely makes a sweeper more attractive.
All right, players get ready for game 2. Now, those of you know, we have Grand Prix Atlanta next weekend, and a lot of that has to do with Commander. Right now we have our Commander. You've heard about Magic, the new Commander set coming out. We've previews right now for it. You can pre-order these decks and singles right now, starcitygames.com/Commander2015. And there's free on-site delivery at Grand Prix Atlanta if you could pre-order by noon Monday.
And we'll have more information about Grand Prix Atlanta later on in this event, but it's going to be very Commander focused. So if you're a Commander player coming to the event, you can order your singles, again, before noon East Coast time this Monday. And if you're able to do that, you can pick up your cards, your sealed product on site at GP Atlanta.
Yeah, one of the things some of the commanders, you now get experience counters. A lot of your commanders scale off that.
Yes.
So for the first time, so what does that mean? Does that mean you put counters on yourself? Do you put a hat on every time you get an experience counter?
I think they're tracked externally, much like infect counters are, I would guess.
Well, that's right,
They're not literally tokens in play. You can't.
Just you don't put a counter on yourself?
I mean, you can. I'm sure it's not technically against the rules, but I would guess they are tracked the same way that infect poison counters are.
All right, well, getting ready for game 2. Brad will be on the play again.
The nuances of the Commander rule set is maybe not my specialty, but I assume they work that way.
Always have a card off to the side that you tick up on your die.
Mm-hmm.
Brad will be on the play again game 2. We have talked about how his Bant Megamorph deck has a more robust aggro plan than some of the other Bant decks we see. We talked about cards like Snapping Gnarlid. Does he want to... I'm at game 1, that seems fine. Does he get away from it post-board now that or do we stick with it?
I think it's good to get away from that stuff in this matchup because Klomparens is going to have a mixture of Fiery Impulse, Wild Slash type of cards that just line up very well against some of those aggressive threats. Knight of the White Orchid is a slightly different case because Nelson has demands for mana, especially if he happens to bring in Master of the Unseen, and it's just a better threat in general than Snapping Gnarlid. But I think that card's probably got to go.
And Knight of the White Orchid is almost a free roll kind of aggro card where you get to be aggressive, but you can also play a late game with it.
Yep. A much lower power level card, but similar philosophy with Den Protector.
Yeah, so when you look at this matchup, and it starts to go late, one of the interesting things is these are some of the most popular decks in the format. Is there one deck that wants to be playing for the late game more than the other? Both have engines.
I like the Jeskai Black side of the engine battle, of that late game battle, because I think that Ojutai's Command is a trump to most of the cards that Megamorph can resolve.
Like Den Protector.
Exactly, Death Misraptor, that part of their engine. And Dig Through Time also is just another copy of a high impact card.
Yeah. Certainly they do have a great late game of their own. There aren't too many exiling effects on the Jeskai Black side of things, so if the engine gets going on Brad's side, he does have a good shot, but...
And that's why you often see, another copy of Utter End floating around in people's sideboards here as well. In post-board games that go on for a long time, you want clean answers to a variety of cards, and you also want to prevent those critical sideboard cards from getting recurred.
Sure, that makes sense. Right now, Jadine on 1 Utter End in the 75. Looks like it has replaced the second one with a main deck Jeskai Charm. And Brad on the play. This time it's Jadine on 6 cards. She's scried to the top, however. As we go into the match, it's turn 1 Warden of the First Tree from Brad and a Mystic Monastery from Jadine. We have seen some finagling with mana bases as some of these players have gotten away from the tri-lands. A lot of the Jeskai decks on 1 or 2. Jadine, with a more traditional mana base, still has 4 Mystic Monastery.
4 is a lot. I think the Pantheon build was playing some number, but not the full 4. But yeah, the jury is still out on what the ideal mana bases for these decks look like. There's so many different ways to do it.
I mean, Abzan decks, by and large, have gotten completely away from Sandstep Citadels.
Yep.
The Warden of the First Tree, on turn 2, it leveled up into a 3/3. Attacks twice. Jadine's at 14. Brad's going to go for a Death Mist Raptor here on turn 3. Looks like Jadine may have a response. Response is simply just fetching into a duel.
The major problem that I have with lands like Mystic Monastery is not only do they themselves come into play tapped, but they're likely to produce battle lands that come into play tapped down the line, and you get some very clunky draws.
Kind of like this. Jadine, turn 3 land is another Mystic Monastery. She passes back to Brad. And Brad with 6 power in play, Jadine at 13, and still playing tap lands is really not free at this point.
Yep, big cost.
Yeah, 0 basics toward the battle land count. Jadine down to 7 on the attack. Has a Radiant Flames in hand, so next turn she'll be able to sweep the board. Play from Brad is Nissa Vastwood Seer.
And this is very good news for Jadine. She did not want to see Gideon that turn. She also did not want to see go with mana up. But
yeah,
now this Radiant Flame gets to be very good.
And that will be the full sweeper. Brad at the ready to bin the creatures. Jadine plays Bloodstained Mire and passes. But yeah, the Mystic Monastery is great for mana, but then you look at something like Bloodstained Mire and realize that it has trouble finding an untapped land even on this board. There's 1 swamp in the list that it could get, and 2 mountains. Here's Gideon from Brad.
And I think last turn might have been a little bit of a rope-a-dope there from Brad. Could have gone for Gideon, elected not to because did not want to run the Gideon into a potential negate or disdainful stroke. So was willing to risk the Radiant Flames there to ensure that Gideon resolved the following turn.
Yeah, the cost he had to do was he had to be willing to lose his Nissa to a Radiant Flames. But as he still got the Forest for it, and with a Gideon follow-up, it looks like that was a fine decision.
Exactly. He's still got a lot of pressure in play. Nissa got a Forest for his troubles. One of the creatures that died was a Death Mist Raptor, and that's likely to come back if the game goes on for a long time. So even though it looked bad, that was a cost Brad was willing to pay, as now Gideon is in play, and most of the threats that died can either come back or generate some value on the way in.
And Jadine at 6 life points right now. Will not be able to take many hits off these. It puts a lot of pressure on her to continue to have removal and sweepers. See, she does have Jeskai Charm in hand. That's a pretty clean answer to Gideon. She'll do that and then play Dragon Master Outcast. Pass no 5th land. And unless she's chump blocking, she's going to 1 here. So Bradding in on tap with a 2/2 and then that Warden of the First Tree.
And 1's a pretty big cost because a lot of the lands in this deck are fetch lands.
Right. So here's the swing from Brad. She'll block Warden of the First Tree. That's going to force a pump out of Brad, which he'll oblige. So Dragon Master Outcast hits the bin. Ally attacks. Jadine is down to 4. Brad, land 6. Post-combat Mastery of the Unseen.
And now he's very protected against a sweeper.
Yeah, I was going to say if it was another 2-drop, Jadine could walk away with another Radiant Flames, but against Mastery, it's a whole lot of trouble on her side.
It's almost a reverse of what we saw in game 1, where Brad is the one who's winning the short game and winning the long game.
Yeah, he does have her at 4. He has a good aggro plan, and even if we start trading, then the card like Mastery of the Unseen can take things over. Brad's turn cracks fetch land. Jadine will Crackling Doom. And take 2, go to 2. And being at 2 against the Mastery of the Unseen is very difficult to stay in the game. Brad can continue to make 2/2s on end step. More tapped lands on Jadine's side, but I don't know if she can dodge this Mastery. She'll pass. Brad will manifest. Now has 2 lethal attackers. Jadine will have to have 2 kill spells. Still on her end step. She decides to pass. She does have an utter end. Were we at a different game or a different life total, she could have utter ended the Mastery of the Unseen.
Yeah, she has nothing cheap in the deck that allows her to get Mastery of the Unseen off the table. You need something like a Race to be able to get the Mastery off the table and kill everything else at the same time.
She does have 2 Felidar Cubs in the 75, which would be close.
Yep.
But they would have had to have happened now. You see, she does play a Dragon Master Outcast. and an Ojutai's command to gain life, so puts her at 6. It's not dead on the board, but very close. This line technically keeps her alive, but things are pretty grim. Here's a swing from the Warden that Brad unmanifested, and the 2-2. Once again, Dragon Master will jump in front of Warden.
But this gives Klomparens, well, now with Gideon, it gets a lot more challenging, but this gives Klomparens the window here where if she is able to sweep the board, she does not die to an activation from Master of the Unseen at the end of the turn. I guess she can't handle the board here, but that was almost enough cushion for her to start making some plays.
Yeah, with some land drops, maybe there'd be some plays available to her, but as it was, Brad did a great job of having a 3-3 on turn 2, a 3-3 on turn 3, and by the time Jadine dealt with it, by having cards like Mastery of the Unseen and Gideon in play, he'd set up his late game engine as well.
Yeah, never got into a position where she could cast multiple spells in one turn, and that's part of the risk of building the sideboard in such a way that you're going really late and trying to get this late game advantage is you have some lands that come into play tapped early on, you don't cast anything on the first couple turns, so you die with 5 spells in your hand.
Yeah, that doesn't mention that last game, even when Brad flipped up the Warden on the first tree in the end step, I believe he had a Death Mist Raptor he could have brought back as well.
This is true.
So, I mean, didn't even need it.
Didn't need it, but I believe you're correct.
So we go back to game 3. We've had 2 one-sided affairs. One game we saw Brad stick on lands, not assemble a good aggro plan, and it was pretty easy for Jadine to bridge her way to the end game. Game 2, though, a different story. When Brad does have that powerful early game, especially because all his creatures had 3 toughness, it was very hard for Jadine to interact. She was on the draw. Her lands all came into play tapped. She just felt a step behind.
Yeah, she was never able to get out in front. The only window where it seemed like she had things stabilized there was a turn where she cast Radiant Flames, but that was more of a ruse from Brad than anything else. He was trying to get Gideon to resolve and was just ensuring that that took place.
So we go back to game 3 for both players. Now, one card have been interested in, because I've seen players talk about this, is when you look at sideboarding play versus draw, does that affect when players play cards like Knight of the White Orchid, does that affect that card's position in a matchup?
Certainly a little bit. I still think that Brad would want it in no matter what, but it does become more attractive on the draw where turn 3 rolls around, your opponent has 3 lands in play, and you can get the Knight to resolve and trigger a little bit more reliably. It looks like Klomparens has done some much heavier sideboarding, though, than Nelson. She went back to the well and changed quite a few cards.
Yeah, Brad, I think, changed a couple for this for game 3. Both games, each player has been on a mulligan, though. The player on the mulligan has had difficulty getting into the game. But like I said, a lot of this is on these 2 drops, whether it's if Brad has a Warden or whether or not Jadine has a Jace.
Yeah, Jace is still, in my opinion, the most important card for the Jeskai Black deck here, even post-board, because Bam Megamorph struggles to get it off the table, and the advantage that Jace gives you is enormous.
Yeah, when you look at the Jeskai decks, the difference between the hands with a turn 2 Jace and the hands without it does feel pronounced.
Yes, especially since the deck's kind of all over the place. You have some threats. Some of them are aggressive. Some of them are a little bit more defensive. You have some cheap removal. You have some expensive removal. You have some 2-for-1s, but they take a little while to deploy. So you can get some hands that really don't go anywhere or don't have the right mixture of cards for your opponent is bringing to the table. So a looter is very important for this deck because it's trying to do a lot of different things.
Yeah, well, Jace has so much flexibility as well, right? Because when, the ability to flash back each of these situational cards, either flashing back a Fiery Impulse or an Ojutai's Command or a Crackling Doom or a Dig Through Time really can help her in a lot of different scenarios.
And that's why you see 1 Wild Slash, 1 Jeskai Charm, 1 Utter End. They're all removal spells, and they're all about trying to get a certain critical mass of cheap removal and mid-range removal and expensive removal. But it's also to get maximum flexibility with Jace.
Especially when you look at Jeskai Charm. That's a card that's fallen out of favor recently, but you looked at it that last game, and it was actually very effective just as a kill spell for Gideon.
Yep. It's a clean answer there.
All right, well, back underway. Game 3, Jadine Klomparens versus Brad Nelson. Both players starting on tap lands. Once again, it's Mystic Monastery for Jadine. This time, we'll see if she has the Jace on the play. It looks like she does. Talked about how important that was. We'll see just what it's going to do this game. And the answer is going to be very little. Brad at the ready with a Silk Wrap, passes back.
Yeah, not willing to risk anything by playing a creature this turn and trying to remove Jace next turn. He's already seen negate and needs to remove Jace from the table.
Back over Jadine's side. Drew a copy of Utter End for the turn. Possible for her to get back the Jace maybe at a later date. Plays Bloodstained Mire and passes. You see on Brad's side, he's also gone toward the blue end of things. A negate, a Mastery of the Unseen in his hand.
But for this plan to be effective, it really hinges around Brad making land drops. And I think he's at risk of missing his land drop number 3 here. So now he has to either sit back on a counter spell or cast Mastery of the Unseen just to get a spell out of his hand. And Mastery's not doing anything for a while.
Yeah, certainly if you're low on lands, though Mastery seems like a trump in the matchup, if you don't have a lot of lands, it's a bit of a red herring, right? It's because we're so many turns away from Brad just being able to pump out 2/2s.
Yep. Brad would even probably cast Den Protector there if he had it, so says a lot about his hand.
Master of the Unseen cast. Jadine fetches for a swamp. And she'll just draw for the turn. So now with 2 basics in play, her battle lands are set to come into play untapped, like this Prairie Stream. It's land number 4 for Jadine. Does have Ojutai's Command and Utter End up, so she'll just pass. So go back over to Brad's side. Does he hit the land? He does, and it's a good one. It's Wooded Foothills. It's the green he needed, but he'll pass. And on the end step, Jadine not going for anything there, not attempting to say Utter End a Mastery or Under End the Silk Wrap, perhaps.
Well, I think with Brad having mana up, she knows there's a pretty big risk of Brad simply countering and wants to just get the Mastery off the table for sure. So I think she's willing to concede 1 activation to Brad to ensure that he gets removed.
So when Brad goes for the 2/2, then she Utter Ends?
I believe that's the case.
Now both players just content trading lands here. For Brad, it's a bit of a reprieve as he was looking really low on lands there for a while. Now he'll get to play. You know, Jadine hasn't... There's not a Mantis Rider and a flipped Jace in play, for example. Looks like Brad going for that end step manifest, and Jadine will... Oh no, she's going to go ahead and... Okay, Jadine was going to Utter End in response to the fetch. Brad disdainful strokes the Utter End.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this line of play from Klomparens here. I think it's just too risky, given how important it is to get Mastery off the table here. I believe her hand's just removal spells. So I would have just said, okay, you get a 2/2 for free on the house. That's fine. But at least I get Mastery off the table.
Yeah. Because Brad was able to counter there, that's so important. Now he plays land 5. And may just pass. I mean, if the Mastery's in play, does Brad even need to resolve anything else?
Nope. He just waits for Klomparens to put a threat into play.
Her draw for the turn was Jace. It's a good one. So there he will start. And we pass to Brad. He'll fetch on end step. Has 2 basics, so battle lands are activated here. And we'll see if the manifesting begins, and it does. Does Jadine have another card like Utter End, another way to get rid of it? She does not. Brad will untap. You see in his hand Negate, Den Protector, Silk Wrap. A lot of great options available.
He's pretty well situated to fight over Jace right now. Oddly enough, has quite a few removal spells in his own hand.
Yeah, and the whole game here has seemed to hinge on this Mastery. There, you know, there's a key turn where Jadine could have tried to successfully remove it, but Brad, with the disdainful stroke at the ready, really thwarted that play, and now she's paying quite the price for that.
Yep.
Attack for 2, Jadine down to 16. Brad fetching out basic planes. That is land 6 for him. He does still have a negate in hand, so now he gets to start running the lines of end step making a manifest while still holding up something like negate. Silk Wrap will be made post-combat for the Jace. Brad not wanting to give Jadine that Planeswalker.
And I like using the Silk Wrap here instead of the Dromoka's command. Dromoka's command has other utility, fizzling red removal spells, and he doesn't want to get into some battle where if his creature gets killed in response, now all of a sudden it's a big problem.
Kolaghan's command cast from Jadine on Brad's end step. It's going to be 2 to the manifest and have Brad discard a card. Looks like he may just accept that. He'll discard the Dromoka's command, and it turns out the manifest was a Death Mist Raptor.
Quite the prize there for Nelson.
Yeah, not what Jadine wanted to see what he wanted to see at all. But from Jadine, it's Dragon Master Outcast, and now without a Silk Wrap and the Dromoka's command, she might have just pulled herself back into this.
Yeah, Brad doesn't have a removal spell that resolves here. He's in a lot of trouble. And even if he does, Ojutai's command can undo all of it. He has Dromoka's command plus negate, which answers the Outcast and 1 piece of support, either a way to counter back or an Ojutai's command. But beyond that, that Outcast sticks, and then the game's totally flipped.
Yeah, so he does still have a command. So it's command, Den Protector, negate in his hand. Well stocked here, but he has to assume he's playing into some sort of removal if he goes for Dromoka's command. Question, I guess, would be whether it's 1 piece of removal or 2.
But Outcast is a lot more powerful than Master of the Unseen. Brad can't win that kind of race.
Yeah, if he's making a 2/2 every turn, but Jadine's making a 5/5 flyer, it's definitely not in Brad's favor.
It's also most of Brad's mana, and Jadine gets to do other stuff.
Yeah. So here's the swing with the manifest. Or maybe we'll checking for a second. And here's the swing. Jadine taking 2, she's down to 14. And now he'll go for the Dromoka's command. This may not work on his side, but the price, he just can't let her untap with this.
Yeah, it may not work, but that doesn't matter now.
He's going to go for Knight of the White Orchid. They both have 6 lands, so this doesn't fetch him a land first. And now it looks like he's going to fight the Knight with the Dragon Master Outcast. The reason for playing that first. Wants the 1/1 counter on a slightly better creature.
Sure. Might as well split up a little bit.
Counter on Knight, have Knight fight Dragon Master. Or counter on Knight, have Manifest fight Dragon Master Outcast.
It's a slight hedge in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, that's excellent. Turns out nothing did go wrong. Dragon Master Outcast is down. And with that, Brad winning that key fight looks good for him. Jadine will have Crackling Doom on end step, but that's fine by Brad.
Yeah, does not matter. He doesn't care about anything right now, except really for Ojutai's command.
Yeah. Outcast, Ojutai's command. It's almost it. There are very few, the one Utter End in Jadine's deck has already been used. Felidar Cubs would matter here.
Yeah, some way to get mastery off the table, certainly. Maybe even Silk Wrap is really the card Klomparens would prefer to remove at this point, but the number of relevant cards is shortening every turn that goes by with Brad generating more tokens.
Pass from both players. We're back on Jadine's side. Took 2 that turn, went down to 12. Brad continuing the plan of leave up negate, make 2/2s. Very low investment for him to do that. Jadine plays land number 7. And she's going to go ahead and dash Kolaghan.
Okay, a little unexpected here. The problem here is that Brad can manage this kind of race pretty easily, just from life gain from mastery, assuming he flips over a reasonable number of creatures.
Yeah, actually, it's very close. Brad almost has this outraced just on the board. He's a turn short, But you're right, if one of these is a creature and he flips it, then he should be just fine. Swing for 4 puts Jadine down to 8. Brad retakes the lead. Now he plays Knight of the White Orchid. This time it's going to trigger. Jadine has 7 lands to his 6. He'll get a Plains. That third creature means if one of those manifests is a creature and Brad flips it, there'll be a lot of life gain waiting for him. 3 more mana is a face-down morph. Could be Den Protector here.
That's a lot of life, the ability to get back Death Mist Raptor, and keep in mind, still a Death Mist Raptor down in the graveyard to get back.
Yeah. And on Jadine's side, not going to be able to deal with that. That'll give a concession. It was Den Protector on Brad's side. So 2 games to 1. Brad Nelson picks up his 5th win over Jadine Klomparens. Remember, 6-2-1 is the target record for the day. Brad getting himself in an excellent spot to make day 2. For Jadine, that's our second loss. She's going to need to win at least 2 of